What was Nigel Mansell's greatest overtake in F1? Should he be a multiple world champion? And how did he go from thinking he was going to race for Williams in 1995 to that infamous short-lived stint with McLaren? Those are just some of the questions from the Bring Back V10s audience that I'm going to answer today in this special Mansell Q&A. As usual, we've had far too many questions, so there will be an extended version of this chat in the Race Members Club, so come and check that out if you want some more Mansell chat. But let's crack on, and our first question is one of the ones I referenced just there in the intro. It comes from Maltese Falcon, who says, what was your favourite famous Mansell overtake? And I've been given a list to choose from. They're all brilliant. We start with Silverstone 1987 on Nelson Piquet. Then we got Hungary 89 on Ayrton Senna, Mexico 90 on Gerhard Berger, Monaco 91 on Alain Prost, or Barcelona 91 on Ayrton Senna. I am given the option to choose my own one that's not in that list, but my favourite one is in that list. It's maybe not the most spectacular or the most opportunistic, it doesn't feature the most, I would say, Mansell magic as some of the others, but it is possibly my favourite Mansell moment ever, and that's the Barcelona 91 overtake on Ayrton Senna. The moment where they are literally wheel to wheel, edging closer and closer down that Barcelona main straight. I love the moment where if you watch it back and you pay real attention to their helmets in the car, they're both looking at their tyres as they get closer and closer together. It's brilliant precision driving from both of them. It's not the most spectacular overtake in many ways. Mansell gets alongside early on the straight. He's got the inside line. He doesn't even really have to outbrake Senna because he's the one who's going to get to the apex first. But it's my favourite of Mansell's overtakes that were listed there because it's an iconic moment of these two drivers who had a great rivalry, and this showed, I think, wheel-to-wheel racing, how it could be done. You know, Ayrton Senna at this point, he doesn't try and move Nigel over to the pit wall or anything like that. He's kind of aware, I think, that he's beaten, but he's going to make Nigel work for it. And Nigel was always one to put up a real fight against Senna as well. So it's great driving from both of them. It's not just an iconic Mansell moment for me. It's an iconic Mansell and Senna moment. So that's why it's my favourite, even though it doesn't, as I say, have some of the magic of some of those other overtakes. Next, I'm going to combine the next two questions. The first one's from Rob, who says, Mansell came within a blown tyre of the title in 1986, and reliability arguably cost him the title in both 1987 and 91. How differently would he be viewed if he'd won these titles and was a four-time world champion? I'm combining that with a question from Richard Royal, who says, should Mansell be rated higher considering he stacked up well against the star drivers of his generation like Piquet, Senna and Prost? The reason I put those questions together is if we perhaps generously give Nigel 3 more championships and make him a four-time world champion, those seasons Rob highlighted, 86, 87 and 91, that takes a championship away each from Piquet, Senna and Prost. So not only do you end up with Mansell as a 4-time champion, but Senna and Piquet are now 2-time champions and Prost are 3-time champions. So Nigel has more titles than all of them. To simply answer Rob's question, how differently would Nigel be viewed in that situation as a 4-time world champion? I think it would change perceptions. Every driver has his detractors and doubters. Those people wouldn't be swayed by this because Nigel drove so well in those seasons at various points as well. If he had any of those championships, nobody in the cold light of day could say he was an undeserving champion in those situations. You don't fluke your way to multiple world championships. Nobody does. So if that had happened, you couldn't say it was a fluke. I do feel that he maybe isn't given the credit, even as a one-time world champion, isn't given the credit he deserves for how big a part he was of that iconic generation. I do feel like sometimes he is considered the fourth of those great 4 drivers when they should all really be considered 4 as a group. It's not, for me, it's not about trying to create a hierarchy in that group. And I think if you consider Nigel is the 4th of those 4, I think that is slightly unfair, really. He was equal to all of them. There's a reason they were the kind of big 4 of their generation. And just because it took Nigel a longer time to win a championship doesn't mean he's less than, or doesn't mean that his contribution to their kind of time at the top through the back half of the 80s and into the early 90s, Nigel's contribution to that isn't diminished just because it took him longer to finally go over the line and win a championship. The next question is from Andrew, who says, I wonder which season would be regarded as peak Mansell. He may have won in 92, but would any of the pre-V10 era seasons make a stronger case? As we've just discussed there, Nigel was excellent in 86 and 87 in particular, when he had a very good Williams underneath him. He could have won both those championships. I don't think anyone would question the legitimacy of those championships, but I do think 92 was peak Mansell, to use the phrase in the question, just because it was this perfect combination of man and machine. That FW14B was a very particular car. It was a great car. It was a dominant car. Yes, he had a huge car advantage that season, but he also made it stick in a way that perhaps not many other great drivers would have been able to do the same thing in that car, because yes, you had all these advantages. You had active suspension working so well. You had traction control. Williams had sorted out their semi-automatic gearbox by this point, but that meant that the car had a higher limit, that you had to be a driver willing to take the approach Nigel took in 92, willing to get on with that car when it wasn't an easy car. The car was so good that in many ways it didn't give drivers the feeling that you would get from a more traditional car at that time. So Nigel, through some bravery, but also I think genuine understanding of engineering, he understood why the car was capable of what it was going to be capable of. It wasn't a case of take your brain out and just go as fast as you can and the car will work it out for you. Nigel understood, right, there is a higher limit on this car than any other car I've been used to. If I do these things with it, if I take what some would perceive to be these risks with it, the car's going to stick. It might not feel like it's going to stick. You're not going to get the feedback that you would expect from a car when you push it to the complete limit, but this car will hold on to that. And I do think, and there is a question I think that we're going to come to in a moment along these lines, I do think he could have gone up against any great driver in that car because it was such a good fit for him. So I think even though he had the car advantage in 92, he was such a perfect match for that FW14B. I think that's when we saw peak Mansell. Now, the reason we're doing this video is because we've partnered with Buds, who are doing a special auction featuring over 200 items of memorabilia from Nigel's personal collection. I've got a couple of items of Mansell memorabilia of my own. My collection could certainly do with a bit of upgrading or having something added to it. So I've been looking at the list of over 200 lots very, very keenly. There's loads of great stuff in here, and I'm going to pick out a couple that have particularly caught my eye. The first of those is a signed race spec 1989 Ferrari crash helmet. This is particularly special to me because 1989 was the season I got into F1. So when I discovered Formula One, Nigel Mansell was a Ferrari driver. As iconic as his partnership with Williams in those multiple stints were, there is something very special to me about seeing that Mansell helmet in the red Ferrari. So that's why I picked that one out. I'm also fascinated. There's a few signed replica steering wheels that are up for grabs. The reason I find these so interesting is that Nigel famously raced with a smaller steering wheel than most of his rivals. So not only is this a brilliant piece of signed memorabilia that Nigel has owned for decades, but it's something very particular to him. If you have one of these, it's going to remind you of the fact, yes, Nigel Mansell used to race with a tiny steering wheel. So it's something that I think was unique to him, and that's why those caught my eye. What's so special about this auction as well is that every item is being sold without reserve. For those of you who don't really know what that means, it's auction speak really for everything must go. Items aren't going to be withdrawn if they don't hit a certain price. There's such a range of stuff in here. There really is something for everyone, and potentially something for every budget as well. Plus, every item comes with a signed certificate of authenticity straight from Nigel, and part of the proceeds from this auction will go to the charity UK Youth, which Nigel has been president of for more than 25 years. So take a look at the full list of lots. As I say, an incredible selection. You can find a link to take you straight to it underneath this video. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments what stands out for you. If you're going to get involved in this auction on February the 10th, when it's concludes with a live auction, you can bid now as well. So let me know what you're interested in as well. Very curious to hear what stands out from such an incredible mix of memorabilia memorabilia that's coming straight from Nigel's personal collection. Let's get back and do some more questions then. The next one is from David Jensen, who says, I want to hear about how Nigel would have brained Alain Prost in 1993. We've already talked about how Nigel was such a perfect fit with the 1992 FW14B. The FW15C that they raced in 93 was even more advanced. Prost didn't really like all those things I talked about earlier. In fact, you didn't really get as much feedback and feeling from the car. So it's a regular topic of conversation on Bring Back V10s that maybe Alain Prost didn't stretch himself to win that championship in 93, whereas obviously Nigel's approach to having a dominant car in 92 was to try and obliterate everyone. I think he would have taken that approach again in 93. He would have loved to race with the number one on his car. He said that when he became IndyCar champion and he got to race with number one in 94. He was so pleased that he finally got to do that, to race as reigning champion, which he didn't get to do in F1. I think he'd have been super motivated. There's a big backstory of Prost where Nigel felt he'd been almost politicked out of Ferrari by Prost. Regardless of if that was true or not, that's what Nigel felt. So he would have been hugely motivated. Renault and Elf, Williams' big backers, had really led for Prost to be signed for 93. Nigel didn't like that because Nigel was there dominating the championship, and then Williams' backers and Frank Williams himself obviously went along with this as well, wanted to get another superstar driver. So I think Nigel would have got in and gone, right, I'm going to show you how badly I can beat you. So Nigel would have certainly, to use a phrase from the question, wanted to brain Alain Prost. I think Prost would have extended himself more if he had Nigel as a teammate. So I really do think we were denied potentially a great battle. We could have seen what Prost really could have done in that car if he'd had to push himself harder, if he'd had a bigger challenge from within the garage. So could have been a great season. I am of the view that Mansell would have come out on top in that car. It was a car that had been developed with Nigel at the centre of it as well. So I think it would have suited him better than it would have suited Prost. He would have come out on top. Would he have destroyed him in the way that the question asks? Hard to say, and I wish we'd have got to see the answer, because I think it would have been a fascinating season to have a dominant Williams but two drivers within that team, a bit like we saw Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg when the Mercedes cars were so dominant a decade ago or more. It would have been great to see that in 93. Let's do a couple more questions. Neil Bates says, what happened with the talks for 95 with Williams before Nigel signed for McLaren? Obviously, Nigel came back and did 4 races in 1994 for Williams. He did the French Grand Prix in the middle of the year, and he did the last 3 races. Nigel signed that 94 deal. It had an option for 95 in it. The reason Mansell was willing to do it was because he thought he was doing the 94 races as a precursor to another championship challenge with Williams in 95. When Williams didn't take that option and signed David Coulthard instead, Mansell thinks they did that because they wanted to save money. I can believe that. There's quite a few times that Frank Williams was reluctant to spend big money on drivers, so maybe he suddenly thought, I'm not sure, do I really want to pay big bucks to bring Nigel Mansell back? Maybe I don't. We're not sure of the exact reasons why Williams got cold feet. But yeah, the reason Mansell ended up having to take the McLaren deal really was that he decided he was coming back to Europe. He was going to live in Europe again, live in the UK again, and wanted to fight for another F1 championship. And then that opportunity was taken away. So then he ended up taking the ill-fated McLaren deal, really, because he kind of made his mind up. He'd put IndyCar in the rear-view mirror, and suddenly he had to take a less attractive option. Let's finish with a comment that's, not really a question, but a great comment from Sim Racer Sam. I think it's a really fitting place to end this conversation. We hope you've enjoyed this little Nigel Mansell chat. There will be a longer version in the Race Members Club if you want to come and check that out. Sam says, Nigel's career is the ultimate redemption arc. It's F1's equivalent of Rocky Balboa, very Hollywood. And Sam's logic is, the crown finally came in 1992, aided by a dominant car, but it had been forged years earlier in losses and near misses. 86, slipping through his fingers. 87, he ends the year broken by injury. In 1990, he tangles with Prost and politics at Ferrari. In 91, he's undone by the early season fragility of the Williams. After so many almosts, the title must have been so sweet in a way that none of us could ever have imagined. I think it's a big part of the Nigel Mansell story. We talked earlier, he could be a multiple world champion. He may be viewed in a different way by a lot of people if that was the case. But in some ways, it fits the Mansell underdog story, that he had to go through so many of those near misses, so many hardships, so many times it looked like it was never going to happen for him. And then finally he ends up in the right place at the right time. He's got a car, as I say, was perfectly made, effectively made for him. It suited him so well. He got the most out of it. He was the perfect driver for that car as well. So he got to it, at an older age by F1 World Champion standards, getting right towards the end of his 30s. He finally gets the championship that he could have won on so many other previous occasions. And I think it is. I like the fact that Sam called it that kind of a redemption arc, and the Mansell story did get its crescendo in the end. It got this brilliant moment late on. It wasn't a final moment. We thought it was when he walked away in 92, but he did obviously tried to come back, and it means that Nigel perhaps didn't walk out of the sport at the very top, but I do love the way that his story built to 1992, and it all felt like, yeah, it does feel quite Hollywood. Like you could write a script like that. This guy who had so many near misses and opportunities that slipped through his fingers, and then it did eventually all come good in dominant fashion in 1992. We'll leave it there then. Thanks to everyone who sent in questions, and thank you to Buds for partnering with us ahead of their auction, which goes live on February the 10th. But you can look at the lots already and you can submit bids in advance. So head to the link we've got that takes you straight to the lots. It's underneath this video. See what takes your fancy. Remember what I said, everything being sold without reserve. So there really is something in there for a range of budgets, which you can't always say about these sort of auctions. So I think it makes this one very special and worth highlighting and worth a look for anyone who's a fan of Nigel Mansell, F1 and motorsport memorabilia in general. It really is an incredible selection of items that Nigel has put up for auction. So all I would say as we finish this video is don't just take my word for it. Find the link underneath this video and go and have a look for yourself.